Good morning, everyone. Welcome to teaching learning session of sociology. In today's lecture, we'll discuss the case of coming of age in Samoa by Margaret Mead. Coming the age of Samoa, it is a psychological study of the primitive youth for Western civilization by Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead studied about the youth of Samoa. And this study has made a significant impact in the reading of ethnography. This is one of the most important studies. Margaret Mead, in contemporary times, coming of age in Samoa remains an influential and pioneering work that has generated interest among the scholars with regard to the ethnographic enterprises and also has given rise to several controversies and debates over the Mead's technique of data collection and validity for her arguments. Coming the Age of Samoa by Margaret Mead. This study is done by the Margaret Mead, and this is one of the important studies. And this study has generated an interest among the scholar. It is the classical work of ethnographic enterprise, but it is not free from criticism. Various scholars criticized the method, the way Mead collected the data for the study, and validity for her arguments. So, this is one of the important techniques. Many scholars appreciated this study, the coming the age of Samoa. At the same time, many scholars criticized this study because of the collection of the data, the way of collection of the data, and the validity of the argument given by the Mead. To conduct this study, Margaret Mead traveled to South Pacific Polynesian island of American Samoa in 1925 to study the lives of adolescent Samoans and understand if adolescence was universally similar in terms of trauma and stress that had become an identifying characteristic of this phase of personality development. Margaret Mead wanted to study about the trauma and the stress of adolescence. The objective of her study was to find out whether there is there any universal similarity in the terms of the trauma and the stress, and this trauma and stress is actually an identifying characteristics of the personality development. To study this, whether there is any similarity or whether there is a universal similarity in terms of trauma and stress of adolescence, she moved to the South Pacific Polynesian island of American Samoa in 1925. She studied about the stress of adolescence. Mead also had an additional objective of finding whether the turmoil experienced by individual during the period of adolescence was biologically determined or it was a culturally cultivated in the community. So there were few objectives. The objectives of this study, that is the coming the age of Samoa. One objective is to find out the universal, whether there is a universal similarities in the adolescence regarding in terms of trauma and stress. And the second objective is this stress during the period of adolescence was biologically determined. The genes played an important role, or the biology played an important role in this stress and the trauma, or this stress or trauma was culturally cultivated by the community, or whether the community is responsible for the stress or the trauma. Is it the biological factors, or is it the cultural community factor which is responsible for the stress in adolescence? Coming of Age in Samoa was published in 1928 as a Margaret Mead's doctoral dissertation. a background of ethnographic research in American Samoa. At the times of Meade's research, America was under the grip of World War One, which had affected the families by displacing them and leading their background in some cases. Because of the World War, there was much hue and cry, the family displaced in the America, and as an emerging discipline during this time, anthropology was engaged in an ongoing debate about nature and nurture with regard to the behavior trait of individual and the importance of biological predispositions. So it was at the time of Mead's research. It was a time of World War One, and many families in America were displaced. And during this period, in anthropology was an emerging discipline, and this and it was there was a debate going on between the nurture and the nature, whether the nature is responsible for the behavior trait of individual or whether it's a nurturing factors which impacts the behavior trait of the individual, right? So no, it is the arguments were the debates were about the biological traits or the nurturing traits, or the community is responsible for the behavior pattern of the individual. The discourses primarily focused on the contestation between the biology and culture in shaping up human personality. So, this argument or the discourse was primarily focused on whether it's a biology or whether it's a culture which shapes up the human personality, which plays an important role in development of individual's personality, whether it's a biology or whether it's a culture. Consequently, the debate had significant impact on the contemporary social problems in World War One affected America. This was the time when the theories of psychoanalyst by Sigmund Freud were gaining popularity among scholars. Sigmund Freud has given a theory of psychoanalyst, that is ego theory. Freud proposed the existence of Oedipus complex among the adolescent boys to explain their relationship with their parents and the general trends of gender socialization for both girls and boys. So, Sigmund Freud, during this period, the theory of psychoanalyst given by the Sigmund Freud was gaining a popularity, and he has proposed the existence of Oedipus complex. What is Oedipus complex? This Oedipus complex explain the relationship of the adolescents with their parents, how the relationship of the adolescent with their parents impacts the behavior and the personality of the individual. And he explained the general trends of gender socialization for both boys and girls, that is the parents relationship as well as the trend of general trends of gender socialization impacts the development of personality of the individual. The dislocation of the families caused immense trauma to people. Around 1920, there were rising concern about teenagers being regular conflict with their parents. These scholars have observed in 1920s because of the various issues, because of the World War, there was the dislocation of the families, and dislocation causes immense trauma, and this impacted the relationship between the parents and the teenagers. So there was a regular conflict between the parents and the teenagers, and scholar began to questioning the parenting style and practice of bringing up the children in community around the world in order to understand how parents overcome the trauma of adolescence faced by their children. So when this when the scholars have observed this phenomena, that there is a strained relationship between the teenagers and the parents, then scholars started questioning about the parenting style or the practices of bringing up the children in the communities. Is it the correct way to bring up the children? What is the correct way to bringing up of the children, or the what is the correct parenting style? So these scholars started answering or questioning these things, right? They wanted to understand how parents overcome the trauma of adolescence faced by the children, how the parents can overcome the trauma faced by the adolescents, because this is the phase and that was the time when the world war was going on, and it has created much hue and cry, and there was the displacement of the family, and there were so many problems, everyone was facing so many problems, and this was one of the factor responsible for conflict between the parents and the children, and basically the teenager, and it is impacting the stress level of the teenagers. So scholar wanted to know how to overcome this stress factor of the teenagers. When Mead left for American Samoa, her mentor, Franz Boas was the mentor of Margaret Mead, instructed her to examine the psychological attitude of the individual under the pressure of general pattern of the culture. So, the mentor, the Franz Boas, the mentor of the Margaret Mead, instructed her to examine specifically the psychological attitude of the individual under the pressure of general pattern of the culture, how the culture impacts the psychological attitude of the individual. So Franz Boas instructed the Mead to study the impact of culture on the psychological attitude of the individual, and compare the attitude of Samoan adolescent women with American adolescents in terms of rebellious spirit that was often witnessed by the parents in America. So, Franz Boas instructed the maid to observe the impact of the culture on the psychological attitude of the individual, and compare the Samoan adolescent with American adolescent in terms of the rebellious spirit, right, of the teenagers. Margaret Mead was of the opinion that all the studies that focused on the adolescent behavior had been conducted by the psychologist who did not document the natural surroundings and social phenomenon like an anthropologist would, as they had tendency to focus on the ideal lab-like condition while testing their theories. Although many studies were conducted on the adolescent behavior, but according to Mead, these theories were conducted by the psychologist, not by the anthropologist, and psychologists carry out their studies in ideal lab-like conditions, right, where they test their theories. While the anthropologist and the psychologist overlook the phenomenon of they overlook the natural surroundings and the social phenomenon. The anthropologist, when an anthropologist carry out these type the psychological studies, they can give a due attention to the social phenomenon and the natural surroundings which impacts the psychology of the individual. Margaret Mead opined that an anthropological assessment of adolescent behavior utilizing ethnographic technique was needed. So, she was in favor of ethnographic technique. That she, according to Margaret Mead, that that field study should be there. Anthropological study is the field study, the field assessment of adolescent behavior. Show behavior utilizing the ethnographic technique should be employed. Coming to the Age of Samoa is a seminal text of anthropological studies because it makes the beginning of pragmatic shift from strictly quantitative data collection technique to qualitative assessment without the loss of empiricism. So, coming the age of Samoa is actually based on the qualitative technique. There are two types of techniques to conduct the research. That is the quantitative technique and the qualitative technique. And coming the age in Samoa is based on the qualitative technique. Key issues in coming of age in Samoa. There were certain issues. What were those key issues in coming the age of Samoa? Based on the research of the Mead in Samoa, Margaret Mead published two books. Coming of Age in Samoa, a psychological study of primitive youth for Western civilization. This was the first book, that is Coming of the Age in Samoa, a psychological study of the primitive youth for Western civilization, and a more serious ethnographic account of the Samoans was published as a social organization of Manua in 1913 by Bishop Museum Press. So she published two books on the basis of his study in Samoa. Mead spent close 9 months in Samoa, during which she studied 68 girls in several villages of the island communities. Her study was based, the sample size of her study was the 68 girls. She studied about the behavior of adolescent girl, and she carried out her study in the 9 months. She spent around 9 months in the Samoa, and during this time she studied around 68 girls in the village, in various villages of the island communities. She reported that unlike American teenager, Samoan adolescent girls didn't experience turmoil and angst of the teenage year and were capable of sexual adjustment. So there was a difference between the adolescent Samoan girls and the American girls. According to the Mead study, the Samvan girls did not experience the turmoil or the stress, and they were capable of the sexual adjustment, unlike the American girls. The transition from adolescent to adulthood was not marked with a period of stress or trauma. So it was a smooth transition from adolescent to adulthood. For someone girls, there was no stress and the turmoil. Adult someone's were of a pleasing them devoid of aggression, violence in their emotions. They were quiet. They were these adult someone's. There was the devoid of the aggressions. There was no aggression and violence in someone's among someone's. Mead concluding that the behavior of American teenagers was culturally specific and didn't have a psychological basis to it. So Mead concluded, according to the conclusion of the Mead, that the culture plays an important role in the behavior of teenager, and rather than the psychological basis of the behavior. So culture plays an important role in behavior rather than the psychological basis. She also believed that this Samoan girl did not face the trauma of making difficult social choices in terms of the peer group and partners, owing to the homogeneous nature of the society. So she observed, according to the observation of the Mead, the someones are quiet, not aggressive, not violent, and there was the no stress and the trauma among the adolescent girls of someone's, and the transition from adolescent to adulthood is quiet, easy, right? And she concluded, Mead concluded that the behavior of the American teenager was culturally specific rather than the psychological basis, and the Samoan girls did not face any stress or trauma of making difficult choices. Because why they don't feel stressed or trauma because of in making the uh, difficult choices, because of the homogeneous nature of the society. She urged American educationists to focus on the system of education that prepared the American adolescent population to make right choices in heterogeneous society. So she recommended that the educationist should pay attention to educate the American adolescent population to how to make the right choices in a heterogeneous society. Mead found that the transition among the someone extremely comfortable. It was free from and then of the teen years in the Western society. So life was quiet, simple, and stress-free, according to Mead in Samwa. The Samvan youth were recognized for their economic and domestic role only when they attained the age of 15 or 16 years. In order to explain it further, Mead exemplified the lack of strict parental control among the someone, especially with respect of the sexual behavior of the youth. So Mead observed that there was no strict parental control among the someones. And when the youth attain the age of 15 or the 16, then youth were recognized for their economic and the domestic roles, and there was the no strict parental control on the youth in Samoa. As opposed to the liberal style of parenting, the American youth had to undergo a strict regulation set up by the parents, which was responsible for conflict between the parents and the children. So, because there was no strict parenting between the children and the someone children and the parents, while in the liberal, so-called liberal society of America, there were the strict parenting, strict regulation set up by the parents for the children, and these strict regulations were responsible for conflict between the parents and the children. Theoretical perspectives in reading coming of age in Samva. The text popularized the method of participant observation while conducting anthropological field work, like uh, uh, it is an anthropo it, this Mead conducted the field work in someone. She studied about the 68 girls of the someone community of the various villages, right? She advocated for the participant according to me, like Malinowski, participant observation plays an important role in ethnographic studies. The ethnographic method employed by the Margaret Mead included the dialogues and discussion with her informants, which was significant departure from strictly scientific outlook of research at that time. See, although Malinowski and Mead both advocated for the participant observation, while Malinowski learned the language, the native language, to understand to understand their culture, to understand what they are saying without any interpreter. While Mead didn't agree with that. So the ethnographic method by Margaret Mead includes the dialogue and discussion with her informant, and which was a significant departure from the strict scientific outlook of the research at that time. Instead of opting for the longitudinal study, Margaret Mead favored a more cross sectional approach owing to the paucity of time and resources. So rather than the longitudinal study, she opted for the cross sectional approach. She interacted with the girls of different age groups in order to understand their worldview and their behavior in someone society. Mead intended to argued that the causes of adolescent trauma could be solely found in the social environment of the youth, and genetics played a limited or no role in determining the disorder they felt during those years. So, after his study, Mead concluded or Mead argued that it is basically the community or the society or the social environment which plays an important role in determining the stress or the trauma of youth rather than the biology or genetics. The biology or genetics played a very limited or no roles, while society, communities play important role in adolescent trauma. Mead's observation yields support for her cultural deterministic notion that she went to theorize about the cultural personality relationship. Mead notes that the Songwon background, which makes growing up so easy, so simple a matter, is the general casualness of the whole society. Because of the casualness of the whole society, right? Mead observed that the growing up of the Songwon adolescent is simple and easy. For Samoa is a place where no one plays for very high stakes, no one pays very heavy prices, and no one suffers for his convictions or fight to death for special ends. So this was a very simple society, and because of this background, the growing up is easy and simple because of the nature of the society. And the disagreement between the parent and the child are settled by the child's moving across the street, between the man and his village by the man's removal to the next village, and between the husband and his wife's seducer by few fine mats. So there were the simplest way to settlement of the disagreements between the parents and the children, between the men and between the husband and wife. In this casual attitude towards life, in this avoidance of conflict, of poignant situations, somewhat contrasts strongly not only with the America but also with the most primitive civilization. So there was a casual attitude among these Samoan people, and these Samoan people they meet. Contrasted that there is a strong the Mead concluded that there is a strong contrast between the attitude of the Samoan society and of the American society, and also of the primitive civilizations. Much we may deplore such attitude and feel that important personalities and great art are not born in so shallow a society. We must recognize that there is a strong factor in the painless development from childhood to womanhood. So, this simple society, because of the simple structure of the society, the transition is smooth and there was no much stress among the adolescent. For where no one feels very strongly, the adolescents will not be tortured by the permanent situations. This was a comparative analysis of someone's society by the Margaret Mead vis-a-vis American society. And despite the comparative nature of the research, Mead still managed to remain the cultural relativist. What is cultural relativism? Cultural relativism is the ability to understand the of culture on its own term and do not make judgment using the standard of one's own culture. Means you're trying to understand someone else's culture without making any judgment using the standards of one's own culture. That is the relativism. Although Mead studied and compared the Samoan society with the American society, but still she managed to remain the cultural relativist. She was of the opinion that the American society needed to overcome the feeling of cultural superiority over these communities. Mead is acknowledged for strengthening the idea of cultural relativism in discipline fraught with comparative studies as a result of deeply embedded ethnocentrism among the practitioners of not just science but of social science, owing to the evolutionary outlook towards the society. So she strengthened the idea of cultural relativism. She compared two societies and the ethnocentrism was involved in her studies. According to Newman, Margaret Mead is also significant in shaping the discourse of race in Western white liberal feminism. Newman considered Mead as an instrumental scholar who challenged the Victorian notion of sexual restraint among the civilized white women and the black men's bestiality in order to discourage any alliance between the two. So Mead, according to Mead, according to Newman, Mead was played an important role. She was an instrumental scholar who challenged the Victorian notions about the superiority of the race, and thus make the Mead an anti-racist and opponent of ethnocentrism. Reception and legacy of Margaret Mead, coming of age in Samoa. Despite of such significant contribution to the academic discourse in anthropology and other associated disciplines, Margaret Mead's research of Samoa adolescent has often been brought under scrutiny. People criticized her research too. One of the most frequent remarks being her tendency to romanticize with the someones. So one point on which the scholars or the author criticized her study is on the basis of her romanticism with the someones. According to few, that she romanticized with the someones. Mead has been criticized for her ahistorical approach, that is, a systematic overlooking of the context in which someone adolescent girls behaved the way they did. She didn't pay any heed to the historical approach, and this was the another point on which Mead was criticized. According to few scholars, she ignored or overlooked the systematic study of the context in which the Samoan adolescent girls behaved in the way they did. History played an important role in this. She overlooked the history. It seemed preposterous of many scholars that in absence of a sound methodological framework, several anthropologists and sociologists that followed her research have questioned the validity and the reliability of the data she collected and the technique employed by her in doing so. So many scholars questioned her techniques and manner in which she collected the data. They question the validity and the reliability of the data, how reliable her data is, and the technique she employed to collect that data. The constant and regular debates surrounding the Margaret Mead's research have instigated academic discourses on the subject of ethnographic techniques, reflexive methodology in ethnography, observer bias, feminist discourses, and so on. So there were so many. This debate instigated many academic discourses on the subject of ethnographic techniques and many other things. Dogo in 2013 agrees that Mead had a political and a theoretical agenda guiding her research. And in drawing the conclusion, following her research and comparing it with the American lifestyle. So, according to the Drager, that Mead had a theoretical and the political agenda in her research. Mead fulfilled her own motives of sexual freedom and the liberal values. In many ways, this progressive outlook of Margaret Mead challenged the morality of American society and made her findings seem slightly controversial and ahead of the time despite of the diverse and the broad readership of the text, because her finding challenged the American society. So people criticized her a little more, right? She had a progressive outlook. Mead had a progressive outlook, and this progressive outlook challenged the American society, and that challenging an American society seemed slightly controversial to the people of that time. The another case today will discuss about the Mukovar women, gender, hegemony, and capitalist transformation in South Indian fishing community, and this was done by the Kalpana Ram. So before this, we study about the Margaret Mead, right? And now we'll discuss the case by Kalpana Ram that is about the Mukuvar women, and Margaret Mead studied the Samoan community, especially the adolescent girl. Ethnographies are very interesting window to study of society, being intensely descriptive and explanatory. Ethnographies tend to create a world seen by the researcher just like the reader. The work by Kalpana Ram does just this. As we discussed in our first lecture, what is ethnography? Ethnography is a study in which the work done by the researcher, it creates a world that's seen by the researcher just like that to the reader, as if reader is creating that word, reader is studying that word. So ethnographing is a window to study this society, and the researcher portray the society in a way as it is without being biased, and he or she or the researcher portray the society as if reader is observing that society. And Kalpana Ram did it well. The work on Mukavar women by Kalpana Ram is to write of difference. On reading the ethnographic study, this becomes quite apparent as Mukuvar community and the existence of women within this community is marked by several differences from the common parallels. There were, as this Kalpana Ram studied the Mukuvar community of the South India, Tamil Nadu, and she studied about the women of this society, and she observed that the women within this community was is marked by the several differences from the common parallels. There was a difference in the women's status in this community and in common. The ethnographer stayed in a coastal village with a social worker and studied the place for over 18 months to gain familiarity about the place and the people. So Kalpana Ram stayed in a coastal village and with a social worker. She stayed in a coastal village for about 18 months to understand and gain the familiarity about the place and the people of Mukuvar community. It is through the house to house survey that the researcher collected information like age, educational level, size of families, and residential frames, marital alliances, and health conditions, etc. So Kalpana Ram conducted an extensive study, and Kalpana Ram Kalpana Ram done house to house survey to collect the data like the age, marital alliance, health condition, family size, and all these things. And this survey then become way of entering in a fruitful conversation and dialogues with Mukuvar men and women over a period of time. Understanding the Mukuvar society. In Mukuvar community, caste settlement is more than the simply a geographical phenomenon. So there was a caste plays an important role even in the Mukuvar society. So caste settlement is important and more than the simple settlement in a geographical community. With endogamous system of marriage, migratory trips for work are common here. Mukuvar community is the marriage system in Mukuvar community is endogamous uh, type of a marriage, right? Endogamous system of marriage is there in Mukuvar society, and people usually migrate from one place to another place for economic reason. The migration occurs also because of pilgrimage purposes, obviously. The entire matrix of the culture and problem associated with it somewhere become an exclusive domain of upper classes only. One of the most interesting factor about the division of labor that the researcher point out is bearing the utilization of resources of ocean by the women. They could do so only through the men. So while studying, she observed, the Kalpana Rai observed that there is a division of labor among men and women, but researcher pointed out that women were barred to women were not allowed to use the resources of the oceans. They cannot use the resources of the oceans. If they wanted to use the resources of the ocean, they can do so through men only. So there, although there was a division of labor, but the resources of oceans were owned by the men. Only the men of the Mukubar society could utilize the resources or use the resources of the ocean. And if women wanted to utilize the resources of ocean, they can use it by through men. In fact, they may not practice the most lucrative occupation that defines the community, fishing. And the main work of the main occupation of this Mukubar society is fishing. Locating women within a Mukubar society. The women within the Mukubar community are restricted to the domestic domain largely. Even when out, they maintain their physical distance from the men. So the main area are the women in this Mukuvar society is restricted to the domestic domain only. There was a division of labor, and the main work of women is the domestic type of the work. When they went out, they have to maintain the physical distance from the men. The entire distancing and freedom is intricately planned as it is differs with age and the marital status of the women. See, when they go out, they have to maintain a physical distance from the men, but again, this distancing and freedom depends on the age and the marital status of the women, while younger women who are unmarried face much stricter surveillance. The women over 40 widows enjoy much freedom of movement. So those who are young and unmarried women faces a strict surveillance rather than women over 40 and widows. The public venue are all openly and easily accessible to the men. This is in sharp contrast to the women who rarely access the public spaces around. So men can utilize any of the resources, public venues, while there are the restriction to for the women. Their movement, that is the movement of the women outside, is marked only by work. If they have some work, then only they can move out. For entertainment and other purposes, they may sit at the porch of their homes or on the sandy lanes outside their houses. They are not supposed to go to the cinemas or any other places for the entertainment. For the purpose of entertainment, they can just sit outside their house or at the porches of their homes. The distancing from the sea becomes a significant reason for lack of cultural capital among women. Women and the existence of the sacred. According to the popular belief among Mukyavar communities, women are also regarded as dangerous to men. They consider that the women are dangerous to men, and the danger they may cause again depends on the age and the social position they have in the society. Again, this danger depends on the age, about the caste, about the position in the society. The supernatural frame regulates women as being threat to the man's pursuit of their labor, mainly fishing activities. It is considered that the women crossing a man's path going on work turns the sea as rough and crazy. So they consider that if women crosses a man while he was going out for work, especially for the fishing activities, this will make this will turns the sea crazy and rough. So they consider that women are dangerous for men, especially while going out for the work, and this danger again depends on the age and the social position of the women in the society. Any wrongful or incorrect conduct by women become the reason for any kind of turbulences faced by the men at the and especially for their safety and upkeep. So, if men faces any of the problems which is threat to her to his safety and upkeep, they consider that women is responsible for this type of the conditions. If men faces any problem, they consider that women are responsible for their unsafe conditions or for their for the not keeping up. With Mukhavar Catholicism, the female principle dominates both the good and evil side. The figure of Mary exists on the good side, while the evil is the Hindi goddesses Sakai and her companions. So, Mukkuva consider the female both as a good as well as evil. For good, they consider Mary, Mother Mary, as a good side of the women, while another goddess Isikai they consider the evil. They consider this goddesses as goddesses Isekai as the evil side of the women. The stages of a women's life in Mukuvar society. There are the ways in which female body changes and is supposed to be kept with age. For instance, in case of the hair, hair may be kept short for young girls. As the age grows, the hair must be oiled and plaited. Also, after puberty, especially after marriage, hair must be tightly made into the bun. There are the strict rules regarding how to upkeep their hair. The hair are left open only after the bath when they should be dried. Other than bath, if the hair are left open, they signify the wrath and disorder. This may symbolize the grief that comes the widowhood and the kind of anger or sexual passion. So even how to upkeep their hair, there were the strict rules about this too. The gender coding of this space, which less politely comes down to restriction on the female use of space, now emerges as a part and parcel of more general concerns with containing women through the regulation and regimentation of the materiality of their bodies. The Hindu value system explicitly showcased menstruation rights. Within the Tamil society, the first menstruation is considered to be the auspicious and is celebrated. This is of much significance to the Mukkuvar female. Even in Mukkuvar society, it is important. In Tamil society, it is all menstruation stages that are marked by rituals. While the first one is about the celebration, the other represents the seculations. See, the first menstruation cycle is considered auspicious, and while the others represents the seculations. The seculations also carries the major fear and overtone of pollution, absence from the public worships, debarring from the domestic cooking, and so on. During this time, the women were considered polluted, right? They were not allowed in the public worships. They were debarred from the domestic cookings. So the first cycle was celebrated. Other was in others the women were secluded. Such practices that involves seclusions are absent from the Mukkuvar society. Although in Tamil society there was a seculations, but in Mukkuvar society there was no seculations. It is among the Mukkuvar that women go out for the work, attend the church services, and carry on regular lives during this period also. Though here too differences occur, some Mukuvars do follow the measures of Tamil Hindu society in name of looking as equivalents to them. Although the Catholic Mukuvarian, there was no seclusions, but few Mukuvar observes the same as observed by the Hindu Tamilian society, so that they wanted to look as equivalent to them. The Mukuvars devalue the entire caste, and this is what can explain their devaluation towards the norm of pollution and purity and exists in other castes. Within the lower caste communities, like the Mukuvars themselves, the women become symbolically similar to untouchable within a Sanskritic paradigm. Within the Sanskritic paradigm. So, in Mukuvar society, the women were considered untouchable. Such implication of interrelationship between the women and the untouchable is discussed by the Krieger. According to him, a Brahmanic Upanyan right of initiation for boys is restricted to the twice born upper caste. There is no initiation right for the girls either. So, according to Krieger, the Brahminic Upnayan right of initiation for the boys is restricted to a twice born upper caste, not for the lower caste. Even this initiation is restricted to girls also. Only the twice born caste can study the Vedas. Women similarly are not allowed to read the Vedas or worship the deity with Vedic mantras. This Sanskriti feminine view seems to be impervious within the Mukuvar, but the non Sanskritic view also has subterranean existence only. Domestic unit as a setup towards the power. According to the Levi Strauss, women become the means of exchanging between the group that are opposed yet complementary. So, Levi-Strauss, according to Levi-Strauss, the women become the means of exchange between the groups that are opposed yet complementary. This extended within the Mukuvar as here the women form the central nucleus of male kins as a vital link in set of interlocking kin, girls' fertility is not only of the importance to the families of her cross cousins, but also secures her own position within her natal family. So, according to Strauss, Strauss, the means of exchange between the group women plays an important role. They are that are opposed but very complementary. And in Mukovar society, women form the nucleus of the family, right? And there is a vital link in a set of interlocking the kin. The girl's fertility is considered to be important because through this she can only make a position with her natal family. The marriage among Mukuvar takes place between the daughters and sons who are within the same village or at least in the nearby village. That turns the life of a woman into highly consolidated one between her marital and natal household. The feminine construction of the power in Mukuvar society is a way power is played by the confinement of the women. On the one hand, while they do not have economic resources and access to the public spaces, on the other hand, they derive their power over men from their exclusion and confinement to the domestic spaces. So, women shows their power in the domestic spaces only. Their power is confined to the domestic spaces only. So, they show their power in domestic space. There is an enormous amount of psychic and mysterious power that endowed over when by the men. Women become powerful in terms of innumerable responsibilities they uphold. They get their power in the domestic field and they get their power. The women get powerful because of their responsibilities they uphold. The women here are considered to be the supreme entity who also act as a connection between the different generations, between different households as a source of continuity. So it is the women who is a connection between the different generations. They get their power from there. Being a connection between the different generation and between the different household. In fact, the marriage of a daughter are arranged in the close vicinity by the coastal people so that they can support us. They can be the supporter of their family, especially in cases where sons are not very dutiful. The girls become the power or the girls helps their father or the supporter of their family where the sons are not very dutiful. In this case the marriages of the daughters are arranged in the close vicinity so that they can take care of her family of her parents too. The importance of the female position become even more stressed due to the sexual division of labor in fishing society. The women become the practitioner of the land-based activities taking place in Vancouver community. Although they were restrained from the to use the ocean resources, but female gained their position and and becomes even more stressed due to the sexual division of labor in the fishing society, and they practice the land-based activities. Whatever the land-based activities the women carry out, or the land-based activities in the Mukuvar society, the management and the expenditure of the cash as well as the entry parallel economy based on the credit function is run by the women. They cannot use the resources, ocean resources, but they manage the expenditure. They manage and the expenditures of the cashes, and they carry out the credit function, right? The women carry out the credit function. That is their sources of earnings. It is important for Mukuvar as it helps in balancing out the fluctuation that keep occurring in the male dominated economic setup. So it is that this women carry out the management and the expenditure of the cash, and they run the parallel economy based on the credit function, and this is very important in the Mukuvar society. It is considered to be important in Mukuvar society because it keeps a balance of the fluctuations that keep occurring in the male dominated and economic setup. The women here, along with the economic power, uphold function of nurturing and taking care of the health, maintenance, and reproduction of domestic unit. Along with this land-based activities, the women uphold the function of nurturing and taking care of the health of their family, maintenance and reproduction of the domestic unit, and the attempts and the persistence efforts in maintaining the unit. Contacting healers, arranging marital alliances lead them to move all around the coastal belt and reach the interiors of the district. So, alliances create arranging the marital alliances, contracting healers. It totally depends on the women. That's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.